So you're a poet, a writer, former military, wildlife enthusiast. I guess you could say. Why don't we start a little bit with your military career? Kind of what drew you to joining the service, and how long were you in? When did you join? Why don't we start there?
Okay, sure. So I enlisted September 5th of 2001 as a 13 Mike, which is multiple launch rocket specialist. Thinking that, the old in the Army now Polly Short thing, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, what could possibly go wrong? And the literal next week, 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And found myself uh, having college. It's going to be a little bit more expensive than I initially planned. but
Mhm.
I joined the North Carolina Army National Guard for, again, field artillery, and I grew up kind of idolizing an uncle of mine that was he was an officer in the 82nd Airborne, and so I always looked up to him. And then I had a buddy in high school that I'd already enrolled in college, and I had classes scheduled. And that first week of September, I don't know, something happened. I went and saw him graduate from basic training, and I was like, man, if that dummy can do this, I can surely do it. And National Guard seemed like a pretty easy option to serve, and also, kind of get college squared away, because I was really nervous about taking out student loans. Like I just honestly couldn't have afforded it otherwise, and thought, well, this is my only choice. So I went into a recruiter, and I so many red flags, but that, I scored very well in the ASVAB, and wanted to do cool guy stuff, and all they had available there was multiple launch rockets. And they said, "You want to blow shit up?" I said, "Absolutely, I do." Turns out I didn't get to do a ton of that either, but but um, but it was interesting. So like I said, I joined the week before 9/11, and the week obviously after 9/11, everything changed. My whole perspective, my mindset changed. Now I was training for a purpose, not just to go to college. Now, stuff got a little bit real. Um, and in 2005, I did my only deployment. So I went to Iraq from 2005 to 2006 with my unit, like I said, the North Carolina National Guard, and we did transportation. So we did convoys, and for about 4 months of that 12-month deployment, I did convoy security, gun truck stuff. So I was a gunner on a 50 cal for like the first 4 months, and then they decided they weren't safe for us to take them above a certain spot in Iraq on the convoys, because we had no armor. It was early days in the war, so we had redneck bolt-on armor just on the sides, that somebody literally bolted on. It stops about like right here if you're sitting in the back,
Oh boy.
which is unnerving. And then when I was standing in the turret, from my torso up was exposed, and I had like a little, gun turret that was like three pieces of steel bolted together. We had sandbags on the floor, and so I guess it was wise they took them, but they ended up augmenting another unit to come in and do all of our convoy security, and then that assimilated us. That one platoon out of four that were gun truck guys, we just went into a line haul platoon. I spent the rest of that deployment in a tractor trailer with no trailer, just kind of doing rear convoy stuff, taking care of our third country nationals, and just driving in circles around Iraq for a year.
Wow. Wow. I saw on your Instagram you were doing some tests of your armor.
Oh yeah, yeah. So part of what I did, what my mission was over there, is like a ancillary mission, was morale booster. So my call sign was Critter Getter. I left an environmental biology program at the University of North Carolina Greensboro to deploy. So I was 3 years into that, and I idolized the crocodile hunter at the time. And I had started making these little films before I left that were kind of somewhere between a crocodile hunter parody and Jackass, and we just kind of started doing that overseas. And it later turned into a documentary that we had that came out called Hammer Down, which just kind of shows some of the funny stuff that we did over there to mitigate. Um, I don't know, just to pass the time, but also not to focus on kind of like the trauma that was happening around us. We were doing stupid stuff like that video you saw where I let a guy drop kick me in the chest wearing my IBA vest, and just to test its durability. If it'll stop a bullet, it'll stop a boot, and it did.
Yeah.
Uh, but that kinetic energy, kept going and I bounced. So, but yeah, that was a fun part of my mission. It kind of kept me focused. So we would have these little DVD premieres. I think we filmed like 4 or 5 DVDs worth of stuff while I was over there, and we would come back to the barracks when we were off missions. I would edit them, at night between missions. I taught myself how to edit on that deployment, and we would watch them together and just laugh. And then more people would get involved. More people would kind of give us videos, and I throw them together. And now I have probably 20 or 30 like mini DV cassette from the old camcorder tapes from that era that 10 years later we were able to kind of cobble together into a documentary with found footage, so to speak. So
That's awesome. That's very cool.
yeah.
Did you Jackass in the early 2000s too was like fucking huge.
Oh yeah, yeah. So again, Jackass, and then the spinoffs like Wild Boys. Like, I mean, I was Chris Pontius personified back then. Like, I actually had alterations in Kuwait make me a pair of desert combat uniform thongs. So, so I wore thongs around the barracks. I actually almost got an Article 15. Like, I was on the chopping block, and some technicality because they made a spectacle out of it. Like, they made me do push-ups in front of a bunch of people, and I'm just doing it wearing thongs. And I think I might have had a pair of chaps and a cowboy hat on that I'd acquired from somebody else, which was weird that existed there as well. But but again, anything for a laugh back then was something that I would take the hits and get in trouble. Minor stuff like my upper body was super strong back then because most of the punishment was just physical punishments. So,
Yeah, so you're just constantly knocking out push-ups.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but it was worth it. I mean, like I said, we did it all the time, and we're smart. Like on missions, we were focused on missions and doing important things. But if there was downtime and we knew it wasn't serious, the cameras would come out. And I made a point too not to film any of the. I really didn't film much of the convoy stuff or any of the stuff that was bad or whatever. I made a point to kind of almost send these things home as progress reports to kind of keep our families from worrying too much. To be like, no, they're having a good time.
Yeah, it sounds like you probably boosted the morale of your team, and then anyone back home probably made them decrease the anxiety. If your family's worried about you, and then they see that, and they're like, okay, he's having fun. He'll be home soon.
Right, and that was my intent for sure.
Did you ever see the show MASH? I remember on MASH there was a character who wanted to get kicked out of the army, and so he would always be cross dressing and stuff.
Yeah,
So
I did. I knew the character, and it was a funny kind of another story. Is my best friend, who they later put me in a truck with overseas, and that I made the documentary with. He and I, before we deployed, we were like, this is back during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And we were like, let's just tell them that we're gay and we won't have to go on this deployment. We called it Operation Jessica Fifi. I don't know where we got the names. The irony is like my wife's name now is Jessica, which is funny, but we were just going to, do that. And then we found out that an officer tried that somewhere else, and they said, well, have fun being gay overseas. And they made him go. And we're like, well, but now it obviously doesn't matter. Regardless, it doesn't matter. But it was a funny anecdote back then. It was a completely different world back then too.
yeah, it was a completely different world back then. I'm curious, you took the boot to the armor. Did you ever test it for any more like severe abilities? Like it can stop a boot, but did you test it with stopping other things or
We had guys like, yeah, sort of like one of the guys had one of those wrist rocket slingshots, and tried those, and then tried like throwing rocks and chunks of brick and bottles and things like that. I mean, nothing crazy because obviously we didn't want to break them either. They were back
you
then.
need
They were
those?
like the real thick ceramic ones, so you could drop them and break them too. Which we didn't. I don't think we realized when we were kicking that they were that fragile. But
Yeah, you want those to be functional when you're in the field, I'm sure.
right.
So okay, and so then what year did you get out?
So I served from 2001 to 2007 in the guard, and I just did my 6 year enlistment with them, and then I was done after that. So my Iraq deployment was August of '05 to I think September of '06, and then I got out the following September in '07. Um, I went back to college briefly after that and did like another half a semester and just it didn't work out for me at the time. Just was, I think it was too soon to kind of go back. People were protesting the war on campus, and it was a weird world to come back to because when we left or when we were training to leave, we were still in like the freedom fries era of early GWAT, where everybody was like super patriots and just it didn't matter. And by the time we had come back and I'd gotten back in school, it was starting to everybody was starting to question and doubt the Iraq War, and it was a pretty liberal. It was a liberal arts college, so it was, a lot of people kind of had differing viewpoints, um, and were pretty vocal about it. And I don't know. I think that and some other things were kind of falling apart around me. That I just said, you know what, I'm gonna take some time off from college um, and just worked. Just
Yeah.
made videos on the side with that same buddy from Iraq, and just yeah.
So, and at that time, were you studying biology or were you studying
So
writing?
yeah, so I I majored originally in environmental biology. I did 3.5 years. I worked in a research lab and studied bats briefly.
Hmm.
Um, I did take a lot of extra classes, which is probably why 3.5 years probably doesn't it didn't equate to a whole lot. Like I took extra writing classes, poetry classes, and a bunch of other stuff too. And then I took a couple years off and came back, tried one more time to re-enroll at that school for environmental biology. And I don't know, something clicked or something changed, and I decided I just kind of came to faith personally and uh, switched schools entirely and joined a small Bible college,
Oh,
which didn't really honor much of my GI Bill at the time. So it was a not a smart financial move at the time, but did a complete shift and did that, and then took 2 more years and got a bachelor's degree in practical ministry and biblical studies.
really? Biblical studies. That's interesting.
So it's like my entire, that's what I'm saying before we started recording. Like my background is it is a hodgepodge of a bunch of different lives lived. And I
That's amazing.
so and it filters its way into my writing. I mean, writing has always been a part of everything I'm doing. When I was in school for biology, I got my first national article published in a small, it's a national magazine, but it's Reptiles magazine. So it was just one that I read growing up, and I had an article about chorus frogs, which is something that I was pretty passionate about. And they published me, and it came out in 2005. And then, while I was in, I was submitting articles to different little publications, just kind of stuff that was free and not a lot of editing, I'm sure. And I've been writing poetry since I was probably middle school, just as a way to process um, life. And I
Yeah,
had spiral bound notebooks full of them that uh, in 2009 I threw in a pile and burned everything I've ever done creatively.
really.
Yeah, sometimes I get these weird ideas just to like submit or sacrifice stuff up and just be done with it and hope that what I create next is better. And
You
so
know
far, I
that
think it's proven true.
that's pretty interesting because I've been I'm kind of like I've noticed I've been kind of on the internet too much, and so I'm kind of like trying to reset my like dopamine system a little bit. So one of the things I've been doing is just like what people would consider really boring. So like I'll just like clean up a junk drawer or I'll like clean the baseboards. And it's interesting that you mentioned you burned a bunch of your old work because I found some old journals that I'll journal and stuff. And I started reading the old entries. And then without even thinking about it, I just ripped them all out and threw them away.
Yeah,
I was
it's
just kind of
interesting
feeling
because
like this I don't this part is over. I've moved on from this part and now I'm ready for a new part. And I'm just gonna rip all these pages out and start on the blank ones.
exactly, and that was a lot of my mindset. At the time, I was getting ready to get married as well, and a lot of like my war journals and stuff. I talked a lot about a fiance that I had while I was deployed. That typical story. Best friend and fiance kind of became closer friends while I was gone, and so that was part of my little spiraling when I got home. But there's a lot of the writing that was just uh, a lot of that stuff was either about different people or just events that didn't matter anymore to me. Um, and like I said, I thought, if I get rid of it, it's still in my brain. If it's important enough to be a story or a poem or whatever, I've still got the framework in my brain. And if I remember it right, it'll be good. And if I don't, it might be a better story.
So are you writing mostly poetry or short stories or essays or a little of everything?
Yes. so
Yes.
I so I do a weekly Substack, which is mostly like uh I guess they're essays or even columns, if you would say, just like kind of short, um, sto- uh, short
So
stories, not short stories, like just kind of articles. Essentially, like this week, I wrote about a trip I took to Costa Rica, but based off of a writing prompt I got in a class last week that I'm taking. Some weeks I write about faith, and a lot of it's my wrestling with doubt and faith, and kind of being a part of that world for a number of years, and then coming out the other side jaded, still believing in the tenets of it, but not in the infrastructure of it, if that makes sense.
yep.
Um, I do write. I've been on the back burner writing some fiction short stories, but I've not published those. I submit them to literary magazines or contests or things right now currently, and I think I'm writing a novel in the background with these short stories, but I'm not really saying that because it feels weird.
Yeah.
The poetry kind of just happens. Like I have a notes on my phone, and I just every so often I get these moments of inspiration and I'll write something down. I've been trying to not write poetry lately because I have a book coming out and we're still not done editing. So my fear is that I'm going to have like a bunch of really good stuff now and I'm going to keep trying to cram it into the book. Um, so I'm waiting for these edits to come back before I really do a lot more deep diving in poetry. Although sometimes it is hard to not.
So your new poetry book that's be in the editing process now, it's called or tentatively called A Toad in a Glass Jar. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So
It's
what's what's that mean? Where's the title come from?
So the title came from a poem that I wrote by that same name, but it's also kind of a bigger picture for me. Like toads, uh, they illustrate a lot for me. Like so, I grew up just catching them and putting them in glass jars. I mean, that's literally a big part of growing up in the South. Is like you have a Duke's mayonnaise jar and a toad and a little stick on the side, and you've got a little terrarium, and but for me, it's always been something that I've kind of glommed onto. I raise and keep tropical frogs and some local toads and stuff too, and it's always been a therapeutic thing for me where I can build terrariums or maintain these animals, and it gives me something other to focus on. If I want to do like a real deep dive psychologically into it, I think also it's like kind of growing up, it was one of the few things that were stable. It was something that I could say, hey, this animal is not going to leave me, or it's not going, it's going to reciprocate what I give it. Um, so I think that's part of it. And then like the metaphorical part of the book title, it's like, a toad in a glass jar. It's like it's in there, but it can get out. It just sometimes chooses not to because it gets comfortable in its little setting. So I think there's a lot of nuance to it. Also, selfishly, like I knew I could take a pretty good picture for it because I'm a photographer, and I'm like, I think this would be a fun one to shoot the cover for.
Yeah. Cool. So you're raising toads. You must know a lot about toads. Have you ever heard of the Sonoran desert toad?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of research going on with those guys with the DMT and all of that. I've been very tempted to get them, not to necessarily use that, but I like them. So I keep cane toads, which are the biggest toads. I guess technically in America, they're more Central and South America, but they do live in Florida by way of people letting them go back in the 30s. The government actually did, and then I think they make their way up into Texas naturally. But they get huge, and then second to them is the Sonoran desert toads. Um, and they have interesting components in their poison glands. I know, like, obviously the Sonoran guys, like I said, the DMT cane toads are. It's more like it'll just give you cardiac arrest,
Oh, wow.
so it's not good, But I wouldn't advise licking any toad if you don't know what it is, and even if you do, it's probably not a great idea.
Probably not. But yeah, I had to ask because we get a lot of like psychedelic people coming through the podcast. So I know the Sonoran toad is in that kind of in that world.
Yeah, I saw it used to be a show on Vice called Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, and I watched the episode on the toads. And the two experiences in the show, one guy was like love, 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 and it was just like a perfect, beautiful moment, and the other guy was like aspirating and fell face first into a creek and just writhing around. So I'm like, oh, I don't know. These are like one of these would probably be me, and it's probably not going to be the love guy. So
So what'd you wrote a story about your trip to Costa Rica. What'd you do down there?
I went on a missions trip actually. A buddy of mine went to a church, um, and I'd always wanted to go, and I just asked, hey, like at the time I was traveling and doing youth programs kind of all over the southeast with animals actually. So I combined both of my backgrounds and kind of used animals as like living metaphors to teach lessons to kids about being better people or loving others. And so
Oh,
I asked them if I could go with them to their missions trip, and I kind of with the caveat like I'm a filmmaker, I can bring equipment and we could film a promotional stuff for the church, and they let me do it. Um, and it was a really good experience. I got to preach down there with an interpreter, and I did the same thing I would do up here. Like I went out and caught animals in the jungle and brought them to these kids, and was like, "Hey, like this is a roach. Like he lives in the dark, but it's not good to live in the dark sometimes. Like we got to expose stuff to the light." So it just was interesting little kind of anecdotes that I hope that my hope with all that stuff was always like, kids might not grasp big theology things, and hell, I don't, to be honest with you. But I can say, hey, like a toad represents transformation, and believers in Jesus believe in a transformation. So maybe a kid will see a toad and say, hey, somebody loved me. You know what I mean? Or somebody does love me. And that's always kind of like the crux of why I do that. It's just telling you can believe what you want theologically, but my whole crux was always like, there's a lot of grace and you're loved, and that's kind of the message I always wanted to get out, especially to kids, because a lot of I think a lot of people don't hear that. You know what I mean? Especially
mhm.
at some homes. So I always had a heart for that.
Beautiful. So you mentioned preaching and you mentioned that you studied Bible studies. What's your and you've mentioned faith a little bit. What's your relationship to faith?
Complicated. uh, so like I said before, I still believe I would still consider myself a Christian. I think culturally though, the way it's played out now, and kind of what that looks like if you were just to say it on face value, it's maybe not what Jesus would have been interested in, for lack of better words. It just seems like when I say I'm a Christian, people automatically assume I'm a bigot or I'm a this or I'm a that, and all these kind of things, like from the bad seeds, the bad apples that we see everywhere, like the Westboro Baptist people, picketing veteran funerals and things like that. But um, I worked a number of years, like I said, traveling and speaking. I did like an evangelical, youth ministry where I just traveled and spoke all over the Southeast. Um, and I'm sorry, my dog is jumping at the door.
Do you want to let him in? You want to take a moment, let him in?
uh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no
One
worries, no
out of the
worries.
three. If maybe he's in here, he won't be bad.
Hi, buddy.
I've got four dogs, so it's probably not wise. Uh, but
He seems happy to be in there with you.
yeah, he's my little Velcro dog. He's the troublemaker.
Yeah,
My wife found him uh, at her work, just sitting on a loading dock, starving, and we fostered him, and he immediately bonded to me. And I was like, all right, we're not getting rid of him. We don't need four dogs, but
he's gonna
what do you do?
stay. What's his name?
His name's Max. So
Max.
he's a healer hound mix.
Oh, cool. I like healers.
Yeah, we have a couple boxers and then a German Shepherd as well.
Nice.
Just a,
Nice.
a zoo.
So where were we? I think we were starting to
Yeah,
talk about faith.
to the complicated relationship. So, like I said, I spent that. I got a degree from a Bible college, and that kind of whole situation. I met my wife there, which is the one positive, from that experience. Out of that, the church kind of shifted gears. Like it was a school that had satellite campuses that a lot like churches would host them. The main campus was in Oakland, and originally it was in New Orleans. So part of the degree path is you would have to go to New Orleans during Mardi Gras and preach on the streets, which was wild. You had to do it twice. And then after that, the church we were going to that I was working for at the time uh, started their own thing and then fired me from the church. So I used to say I got laid off in the full time ministry because I worked for like the video graphics department and also with like middle school youth ministry. So I just decided at that point to survive, I would do my the thing I was doing part time on the weekends, I was just trying to do it all the time. So I'd make cold calls to churches and um, had a pretty active YouTube channel at the time, called Catching Creation, and we did this DVD series. So I guess 4 DVDs of that where it's like just me um, catching animals and then doing these like Jesus jukes where I would say, "Hey, you know about this fact about an animal? Well, guess what about the Bible?" And some of it was good and some of it felt forced. Looking back, um, but it was still fun. Like the intent was just again just to show people that hey, like these animals aren't evil. Like snakes are good, and everything was created good originally. Was kind of the crux of it, and so it was a one part message as an evangelist and one part conservationist, and the lines blurred between the two a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and then about 2015, I just got real jaded and burnt out because, believe it or not, churches don't treat you the best, especially if this is what I was doing for a living. And more often than not, churches would either not pay me or like when we would agree on something, or I would travel and spend all of my money just getting to a place um, and just things wouldn't work out. And having to also support a miniature zoo that I was taking on the road with me because I was doing the animal part of the program, it just wasn't working out. So I took a job with the federal government as a claims processor for the VA in 2015, and really haven't been to church since then, except for funerals and seeing a few friends speak here and there. Um, just got real burnout on the system and the culture, I guess.
Got you. Got you. I noticed on your Substack that you say you write about American Southeast from wildlife to wild nights and everything in between. So I'm curious, before you were doing the kind of traveling and preaching, did you have like a wild nightlife era in your life as well?
Uh Sort of. I grew up straight edge for the most part. And I was in hardcore bands. So that was maybe where that part of it comes in, or like the
Yeah.
literal wild nights, like where I go catch frogs at night and vipers. But also, yeah, like I spent a good number of years in hardcore bands, and that was a big part of my cultural upbringing. So no, I mean, I never was like a crazy party person, other than like the few years right after Iraq, where I was just trying to drink everything away, and then I quit everything again after a few years.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah.
So I remember too earlier in the conversation you mentioned that coming out of the military and going straight into like liberal arts college in the
Mhm.
early 2000s was challenging. And now that you mentioned that you were drinking quite a bit when you got out of the military, I'm curious, was the transition very challenging getting out of the military and back into civilian life?
It was interesting. Like I had a job, already. Like I worked for a sign shop with my uncle at the time. And so like I had stable employment and things like that. And I'd never drank outside of the weekends, but like on the weekends I would go pretty damn hard. And um never was like an alcoholic or anything crazy like that, but just drinking a lot, and broke it up with a 7-year relationship not long after I'd gotten home, and just a lot of life changing things were happening at the same time. I wrote an article a while ago, and it's supposed to get published eventually. But about a dog that I got. Like I got my first. It's a white boxer. Right after like the month I got home from Iraq, and I think that dog literally saved my life. I mean, it gave me something to live for at the time. You know what I mean? Where even if I was kind of doing these spiraling sleep all day kind of things, like I knew I still had to get up at least to feed and water and walk the dog. So like it uh, kept me alive again. So
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, our pets are really important if we're spiraling and sinking and kind of receding into ourselves and staying in the apartment. You still got to get up at 6
right.
a.m. to let them out.
Well, it's transition's interesting too with the National Guard, because it's like on the one hand there is no transition. Like I was a college student one day, I was in the combat zone the next, back in college. You know what I mean? So there was no like transition, but that's also part of the problem is there's no infrastructure in place to like help you. It's like even though most of us are in the same small town, or within like an hour or so radius of that, that armory that we go do our training at. Once you come home from war, everybody's just got their own lives to get back to, and you start to kind of fall apart again. I was
Mhm.
thankful that, within a few years, I'd started reconnecting with a lot of the guys. My brother actually deployed with me on that deployment, which is kind of one of the other interesting oddities about the National Guard. Is we had three sets of brothers on that deployment,
Wow.
um, and so I was thankful that at least I had somebody that knew where I'd been and what I'd done, and at least shared the experience. And then a few friends that I stayed close with definitely helped. And I think having this other mission for so long about just making these videos at the time, like, um, even though it's early days of YouTube, we would just go out, and the guy I was in Iraq with, Daniel, and I would go out and just film catching snakes or catching frogs or whatever, and I would, pretend like I knew what I was talking about, because I guess I did, and kept thinking one day I'll have a television show back when that was relevant, and somebody will discover me, and it almost happened, but it never did.
Oh man. Well, there's still time. So I was looking at some of your Substack articles and I came across some titles. One of them is called Permission to Grieve. And I'm curious if you could tell me what does that mean to you?
Yeah, that one's interesting. Ironically, the same fiance that I was with during my Iraq deployment, um, uh, and ended up breaking up with as a result thereof. She died last year at Christmas time, and it was
Oh man.
interesting because it was such a weird mix of emotions for me, because obviously I love my wife, and I didn't want to make her feel lesser or any kind of way, but I felt very conflicted because this person I'd spent, from the time I was 17 years old to like 23, 24 years old, like through, you know, high school graduation, basic training graduation, Iraq, just all these things. So I grew up more or less with this person, and that family. And when I found out she had died, and kind of how she had died, I just didn't know what to do with it. And so I just did what I do normally, and I wrote about it. And it was one of the ones that I was really conflicted about sharing, because I never want to make other people feel, um, well, don't want to make them feel something they don't want to feel, I guess. And so I just made sure my wife was cool with it, let her read it, a bunch before I ever published it, made sure it was okay, and then bounced it off of a few other people. And usually when I have that kind of reluctance to share something, it is usually a article that is more impactful typically.
Mm.
But it's always the ones I don't want to share the
Yeah.
that people enjoy, I guess.
I think it takes a lot of courage to put anything out into the world for other people to see.
Yeah, the family ended up thanking me for it, and it opened up kind of a conversation with them as well. And I actually went and met with them, and talked to them about a lot of things, as a result as well. So it was good on the one hand of reconnecting with these people that, again, great human beings to me, when I was growing up, supported me during the early military years, of my life. And um, so I mean, again, it was cathartic in that way.
Yeah. I'm curious what your writing process is like. Like you mentioned, if something happens, like the way you process it is by writing about it. I'm curious, like, do you write by hand? Do you type? Can you talk a little bit about like, something happens, you get like some challenging news and now you're going to process it by writing. What's your process like?
Yeah, typically, I don't handwrite a lot. If I do, it's like just sporadic notes here and there. But by and large, what I'll do is, especially lately, is anytime I get like an idea that I can't escape, my phone is always with me. So I'll just open up the notes app and I'll just start typing without trying to think so much for edits. I think that is the beauty of notes on my phone, where it's like, it's not, you know, Microsoft Word or all these other programs that kind of will flag everything that's wrong with your article as you're writing it. So I'm just writing it. I'll figure out the edits later, and I just write until the idea starts to kind of take shape, and then I'll usually share that, um, to my computer, and then I'll get on the computer and I'll kind of put it in Word. I'll run it through Grammarly to make sure, because I'm horrible with commas and stuff. Um, so I try to do that and just try to get it to like look like something, and then usually I'll do about 5 or 6 edits and then be like, all right, I think it's close. And it depends on what it is. I mean, some stuff, especially the fiction stuff. I mean, I've been editing one thing for a year now. Just I'll write it, change something, tweak something, and some of the bigger articles that I've written that are more personal too, like I'll just sit on them because nobody's waiting on it. So might as well make them, better and see if I can't publish them outside of my own personal Substack too.
I'm curious about Substack. I've heard of it. I know it's like new-ish. How
Yeah.
does this work? Do you get paid or do you just upload stuff or what's the deal with Substack?
Some people get paid. I didn't set mine up to as like a payment thing. I set mine up to be free. Um, Truthfully, Substack has been an interesting exercise because I didn't know what it was either. I saw John Daly. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He just wrote "Tough Rugged Bastards" about Marine Debt One and Marine Raiders. But he was the first person I saw that was on there. So I started following him there, and then I said, well, I've been writing forever, and I go back and forth. Like I used to blog on my website, and then I would occasionally put stuff, different places. And I've been putting stuff in magazines here and there for the last couple of years, just as I can. But I use Substack more for personally as like a discipline to say, okay, I've got a deadline. Like every week, I have to put something out by 6 a.m. Friday morning. Some weeks I might write, you know, like this week I've already finished it, and it's done. It's scheduled. It's ready to go. Over the years since I've been doing it, like I might have a couple articles in a week and schedule out the whole month. And then some weeks, Thursday night at like 6, 7 o'clock at night, I'm scrambling to come up with an idea, like because the through line for a lot of what I write there is dissonance. I mean, essentially, it's like just stuff that I'm wrestling with one way or the others, and a lot of times it connects with other people. Hopefully, um, but it's more of like again like a column kind of thing. Like I took a lot of inspiration from a guy named Sean Dietrich, which he runs a daily column called Sean of the South. It's real positive, like overwhelmingly positive, but his stuff is really good. And so he does it every day. Like I don't know if I could do that, but I do once a week, like I said. And Substack, I guess, is set up more like a. I use it like a blog, but I guess it's technically a newsletter.
Mhm.
Um, so it'll send emails to people when you publish. And what I like about it is like I follow a handful of guys like John Daly and Leo Jenkins and a handful of other guys, Fred Drummer, and you could kind of have them all in one place. You know what I mean? So like if I want to go and read, get on the app, I can read all the articles kind of in like a literal stack on there every time somebody puts out something new. And you could have it come through the app or have it come to your email inbox, kind of whatever is convenient to you. So
So you're putting something out every week. About how long is each like article that you put out?
uh, when I first started, because I didn't know any different, I was writing feature length articles every week. So like anywhere between 1,500 words and like 3,500 words, which is ridiculous. And it just, you can't, number one, people don't want to read that much. And
Hmm.
number two, it's just really a lot. So I've dialed it back. Now I'm aiming for usually like the 800 word range. 500, 600 words on the low end, 1,000 words, 1,500 words on the higher end lately. Um, it depends too. Like I put out an article last year that got published in Reptiles Magazine about, if your pets get bit by a snake, and that was a 4,000 word article that it was in depth, but I think it was relevant to what it was, and I put it, linked it to Substack as well, for that week. So
Yeah. And does it show you like how many clicks you get? Is it kind of like social media where you can see like how many views you're getting?
yeah, and that's like the real bummer of it all for me, is because I obsess over analytics. Um, and it doesn't show like publicly, but like I can click on it and view the stats on the article and see how many followers or subscribers I'm getting, which growth is pretty stagnant on there, which is it's whatever. Like again, I have to frame it that it's this for me. It's about the discipline of doing it and not about who's following it, because like some of the people that do follow it are just super heavy hitters that I really
Right.
respect. So that's all that matters to me. But yeah, you can see the breakdown of which ones are do well and which ones maybe don't do as well, and how many people open the emails, and where the sources are coming from.
I like the discipline of the creative process of like, I'm going to commit to one a week. I'm kind of similar with my podcast. I
Yeah.
just enjoy like every week I'm gonna have another conversation, and it's like my personal creative process to put something out once a week.
And I'm sure you've seen the same thing. Like in the time you've been doing it, you've gotten better at doing it. And like the same with the writing. It's like I can look at an article I wrote last year, and they're not horrible, but like I cringe at them now. I'm like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh. And I'm sure in 6 months from now, I'm going to cringe at what I wrote yesterday. You know what I mean? I hope, because that just means, I'm growing, and and that's the ultimate goal is, maybe eventually if I write some kind of memoir or some kind of, personal book or whatever, I've got the framework. Like I've got, 70, 80,000 words right now, all these stories about my life that I could easily distill into something else if I wanted to.
Yeah, it takes courage to put that stuff out too, man. So I give you
Yeah.
respect for that. You're like, I'm gonna put something out every week, and if the stuff I wrote a year ago is cringy, I still put it out.
That's like the one that's coming out this Friday about Costa Rica. I included the documentary that I filmed as Catching Creation, as a link at the bottom of it. And I watched it, and it was good, but there was like moments in there where I said things where I'm like, even theologically, like I don't know how I feel about some of the things I said, or maybe I believe it, but I don't know if it's like as important as I thought it was at the time, or I don't know. It's interesting, but again, like a lot of people enjoyed that stuff, and a lot of people don't have the dissonance that I have with a lot of it. So I just let it be what it is. Usually with the faith stuff, like I write every so often articles about faith, and I try not to do too much of that because I don't want to push people away from what I'm doing with it, because I think too many times like people will try to force a narrative, and I just want to offer questions or examples of my experiences. I'm not trying to force anybody to believe anything. Like this is just where I'm at. You know what I mean? So
I personally like the non-denominational approach to spirituality. I think that a lot of people can get really triggered by like, certain words and certain religions. And for me, broadening it out is more comfortable. Maybe that's a cop out. But I personally think I talk to people a lot about health, wellness, alternative healing modalities, transitioning and that kind of thing. And I think one common theme is some connection to faith and a higher power, regardless of how you find it. It seems to help people a lot.
yeah, I have a good friend. Like we have a lot of in-depth conversations. He's a Hare Krishna, and like truthfully, before him, I didn't know what that was. And like we'll have these in-depth conversations, and we're saying the same thing, for all intents and purposes. And I've had some of the deepest conversations about spirituality and faith with him than I've ever had in the church, and it's just interesting. Like I think once we think we've figured out God or whatever that is, I think that it's no longer God. Like so, I'm okay with being wrong. I'm okay with people challenging what I believe because I don't care. Like, like I just
Beautiful.
I it works for me, and I think at the end of the day, like I'm just striving, to be better. And I think if I come on some other truth about what I believe, I'll investigate it. Like I'm not intimidated by any of it. You're right. Like nothing is worth triggering people or fighting about it. Like, I used to dig into apologetics and want to prove everything, you know what I mean? And challenge people in that way. And now I don't know that it matters. Like at the end of the day, like even with my functional belief in Christianity, it's like, it's grace. Like I don't care. Like I think God loves us, and I think I'm just gonna die on that hill. Like whatever.
Yeah, there's a couple of quotes that I like. One is at the end of the day, we're all just walking each other home. And then another one is all paths lead back to God.
Yeah.
So,
I think
you
if you're
could,
seeking truth and God is truth, I think you're gonna find him or it. You know what I mean? So
yeah. I also think for me personally, part of the deal is accepting that I can never fully understand the mystery while I'm in human form.
yeah. I think that's the beauty. Like again, that's the beauty is the mystery. Like that's faith. Like that's in a nutshell, that's what faith is. And I think once I feel like I've got it figured out and I become self-righteous about it, fuck. Like I'm wrong. Like it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I want to ask about one more of you. I have a bunch of your titles written down that I want to go, oh,
Sure.
what's that mean? So, what tell me about space toads?
Okay. Uh, I'm trying to think of what that one was about. So that was one of the weeks where I didn't have anything. Um,
Hmm.
and my wife said, "Why don't you write about space or toads?" And I just kind of combined the two and talked about how as a kid I wanted to be an astronaut, but I get seasick and car sick, and so that wasn't going to be a thing. And then I talked a lot about, you know, having uh, creating these little environments for toads. I believe I can't fully remember that one, to be honest, but I think it was talking about building terrariums and kind of how I've created these little ecosystems for them. And again, that was an example of literal. That's the discipline right there. It's like I've got nothing. I'm getting ready to write an article. The article I think was about not having anything to write about, and I just said, "Bear with me. Like I'm starting this in real time, and whenever I finish it, it'll be what it is, and you guys will know when I know." And I think that's kind of the crux of that week.
When I was much younger, I used to free write just as like a exercise for my mind. And I would do that sometimes if I was free writing, but I actually had nothing to write about. I would just write, I am writing now. I have nothing to write about. Maybe something will come soon. And when it does, it will be here on this page.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it just takes getting in front of the computer or the pen or the whatever, and see what happens. I mean, it hasn't failed me yet. I mean, it might take longer some weeks than others, but if I just show up, I think it was oh my gosh, I can't remember the guy's name now. The War of Art. Um, where's the book?
It sounds familiar, but
Yeah. Anyway, he
don't.
said there's no such thing as writer's block. You know what I mean? He said plumbers don't have plumber's block. If this is what you're doing, get out and do it. Basically. Um, oh, it bums me out that I can't think of his name, but whatever.
There was a book I read about writing and getting through blocks called Bird by Bird. And
Yes.
that was like an analogy of like I'm trying to remember. It was, I think I haven't read it in like 10 years, but the analogy was like the guy was a bird watcher and he wanted like all these things on his list, but he needed to like tick them off just one bird at a time. And then they use that analogy for like write it like one page at a time, just like write like one page, bird by bird, and you knock this thing out.
Yeah, I read that book last year, or the year before, listening to a podcast from a band that I grew up listening to, and the guy said that he had read that book, and afterwards he wrote like 40 or 50 songs, just boom, boom, boom. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And
really? What
kind of use that.
what band do you mind sharing?
Yeah, it was Saves the Day.
Okay. Yeah.
Either love them or hate them. I am in the love them camp. They're kind of a pop punk early emo band from the 2000s.
I was gonna say I was a teenager in the early 2000s, so the emo days are close to my heart.
Okay. Yeah, they're one of the Godfathers. I think I'm going to see him in November.
Oh,
Actually,
no way.
I planned my mid tour leave from Iraq in 2006 around seeing Saves today at the House of Blues.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, like early 2000s, like Taking Back Sunday and like all that stuff is right up my alley. But I like the
Taking Back
hardcore
Sunday.
stuff. I like the hardcore stuff too.
Yeah, there's like some lore about Adam Lazar from Taking Back Sunday. He was from my hometown uh, in North Carolina, and then moved up to Long Island to be in that band with them. I know some of my friends like went to school with him, so it was kind of cool.
Yeah, I heard there's drama. We're getting into the emo weeds, but I heard there's drama between Taking Back Sunday and Brand New.
There was years ago. Yeah, it was something with about a girl, I think, between Jesse Lacey and the guys from Taking Back Sunday. I think it was something. I think that song 70 times 77 was about it.
Yeah, yeah. I live in LA, so like a couple years ago I was at the Amoeba Music, which is like a huge record store, and I was buying some CDs and I was getting like it was like Pig Destroyer and like Darkest Hour and then like Dashboard Confessional.
Yeah.
And I was checking out and the girls like the hardcore kids are always okay with Dashboard too.
It's
It's
so
like,
funny. Yeah, there was like the gateway drug. I think Dashboard and the Get Up Kids for me were big. I grew up in like the metalcore, hardcore scene, doing all that stuff. And our drummer in the first band I was in introduced me to the Get Up Kids and Taking Back Sunday and a band called Keepsake. And it was a really cool time back then. This was like 2000, 2001 era. So it was when all these bands were like coming up, but like taking off at the time. Um, It was just a great time to be alive.
Yeah, the early 2000s, man. What fun. So what were you? Were you a singer or were you a guitar player?
Yeah, I did vocals. The I guess the only band that did anything decent was a band called Red with Vengeance. And they just actually this year a small record label reached out to us and asked if we wanted to put out our old EP on vinyl. And
Cool.
it's 20 years old, so we're like, yeah, like if you can salvage that mess, like and do something with it, sure. Um, and so the record label's Force of Reckoning, which is also ran by a veteran, and it was super cool. I mean, it's cool to have like a tangible thing to hold in my hand. I actually had to quit that band to deploy to Iraq, so I never got to actually release that album. Like they ended up replacing me as a singer and changing, everything after I left, and it pretty much fell apart not long after. As far as that version of it, so it was cool. Like 20 years later, to say, hey, like I existed. Here it is.
Nice, nice. I don't know if you've ever heard of, now that we're in the emo weeds. In about a month I'm gonna go see my friend's band called Pianos Become the Teeth.
Oh yeah, yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard of them.
so they're from Baltimore and that's actually where I'm from too. So I know a couple of those guys. So I'm gonna
I
see them
think
when they come through town.
I think they play with like movements and bands like that. I feel like.
Yeah, yeah. And they used to be like totally like, like screamo, like brutal throat kind of vocals, and they've actually transitioned. Now people call them Pianos Become the Indie Band.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of bands will do that. They kind of mellow out as they get older. And I tried to do another hardcore band a few years ago, and I'm like, what the hell am I gonna scream about, man? I'm like 41 years old. Like
You
I'm,
can you
I'm.
can only scream for so long.
It's like arthritis and lawn stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. And then you kind of like you retire into like alternative country music.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is a lot of people are now kind of shifting that in that direction, like the outlaw country people or whatever. You have a lot
Yeah.
of friends that are still doing hardcore bands, and it would be fun to do it one or two more times. You know what I mean? But I don't think I have the stamina to do that anymore, like to scream like that anymore. But I still, definitely miss it. But
What are you listening to these days?
trying to think of the last thing I downloaded. There's a band called Like Roses that I shared the other day, which is like a pop punk. I'm horrible with genres, so but I like them a lot. I still listen to like all the old stuff we were mentioning earlier. Um, Kubla Khan is another like a modern,
Hmm.
hardcore band that's out pretty big right now. Um, my buddy is they're still playing hardcore in a band called Advent, which they were all the guys from Beloved, which is another big band from Solid State way back in the day. I still listen to all their stuff, and we'll go to shows every once in a while. Yeah, uh, nothing crazy right now. It kind of escapes me now that I'm on the spot, but
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm like, shit, if he asks me, what am I
I'm
gonna
like,
say?
I can open up Apple Music and
Yeah.
tell you what I've been
Uh,
listening to.
I actually, as you were answering, I was like, okay, if he says, what about you? I'm
Yeah,
gonna say this. I'll tell you, I just discovered it's weird because I'm getting a little bit older. So I'm like, I discover music like more slowly, I feel like. But I just found a hardcore band called Boundaries.
oh
So
yeah,
if
same, same.
they're pretty rad, pretty rad.
On Reels, right? Like I've been finding so much shit on Reels or wherever else, and it's like that they were one of the ones that I'm like, good lord, this is great.
I like this is heavy. I like it.
Yeah.
But honestly, what I mostly listen to, I went down to Brazil last year and spent some time in the Amazon rainforest. And so I've been listening to like a lot of the tribe that I spent time with was called the Huni Queen, and I've been listening to like a lot of their music, like ever since being like completely submerged in nature with no Wi-Fi, and it's like you just hear that they're just playing music like at any time of the day, whenever they feel like it, they'll just break into music. I've been listening to a lot of their stuff. But I say like every now and then I need spiritual detox, and then I'll throw on like Boundaries or something like that.
Yeah, that would be amazing to spend time like that in the jungle with the indigenous people. Like just that sounds really cool.
Yeah, I was down there for 10 days in the rainforest, and it felt so good to not think about my cell phone and not have like the the urge to reach to check my messages or my notifications or my social media or like grab my phone when I'm using the toilet. Like I didn't even think about any of that stuff. And it was really amazing. It was challenging to get down there though. It takes about 5 days to get there, but it was an amazing experience.
How hard was it not to think of it like something you're going to produce something for? You know what I mean? Like, because I know you're a creative, I'm sure, and it's like you want to experience it for what it is, but then you don't want to you don't want to not use something from it, but then you don't want to make it about that either. It's kind of that juxtaposition between the two worlds.
So there was a guy down there who had like camera gear, and he was kind of documenting, because we were down there because they had a festival where they allowed about 50 foreigners into the village. And so they had a guy down there who was documenting things, and I kind of was like, I'm just gonna like whatever he captures will be like I'll receive that,
Yeah,
like I'll get those pictures in that video from him. And because I did have those moments though where I still had my phone on me, even though there's no service, and you want to whip it out and take pictures and photos. And there was a few people who were like straight up creating content, like hey, film me getting off the boat, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And we actually had one moment where some people in my group, about halfway through, they were like, "Hey, we're gonna cross the river, because if you cross the river and go to another village, they have Wi-Fi over there. Do you want to come with us? We're gonna like check our notifications and post some pics." I started to go with them, and then my other friend goes, "Are you sure you want to go with them right now, or do you want to just like kind of stay in the enchanted forest while you're here?" I said, "You know what? I'm not going to cross the river. I'm just going to stay off Wi-Fi. All the uploads can be done when I return."
yeah. I'm trying to have that mindset myself. Like I'm going to Montana in October, the end of October, through an organization called PB Abate. I applied for a program and got accepted, and so it's called Return to Base. So it's like a therapeutic thing where it's part of a book club. We're going to talk about the things they carry by Tim O'Brien, but there's also a lot of like just fireside chat type stuff and hiking. And I'm excited. I'm not even bringing a camera. Like it's the struggle that I have where I'm like, I need to bring camera gear and this and that. And I'm like, no, like I don't need to make a product. Like if something is that happens, it's life altering. I'll be able to write about it. But like that's not the intent that I need to go. Like I need to go and actually just refill basically, like and not always have to give everything I've got.
Is it a veterans retreat or a men's retreat?
Yeah, it's a veteran thing. It's anybody that served. It's a really great organization. Uh, I think Thomas Schumann is the guy that started it. It's based off of one of his soldiers that died, and they created basically a patrol base in Montana. And forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn. I'm not 100% on all the details, but a lot of my friends have been a part of it. The guys through Dead Reckoning Collective are very active in it, and that's why I applaud, because every year I see just FOMO where like all the guys that I know that are authors at Dead Reckoning or different people at different levels are sharing about how amazing their experiences were. Um, and so this year I said, you know what, like I'm not as active in the group as I probably should be, but I'm going to apply and just see if they accept me. And they did. So we'll see. It's super out of my comfort zone. Like I don't like to fly. Like there's just a lot of stuff like that where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna figure all this out.
When are you going?
The end of October.
End of October.
Yeah.
Maybe after you return, you come back on the podcast and say how it went, and
Yeah. I
talk
would
about
love
how
to.
all the nerves dissipated and everything was amazing, or let us know how it goes.
I will. I'm excited. Like I'm almost halfway afraid that I'm going to want to live there because I mean I love North Carolina. Like I mean I've never lived anywhere else outside of training or deployment, but um, I love the Southeast. But I'm very interested to see that's like a whole different world out there.
One of the guys that came to the jungle with me lives in Montana, and he used to live in LA. I'm in Los Angeles right now. And he actually said to me, he goes, "Man, you got to move to Montana." He goes, "I'm telling you right now, you will become happier as soon as you leave Los Angeles." So I got a buddy who's moving from LA to North Carolina. I love North Carolina, by the way. I grew up going to OBX.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so one of my buddies and his wife are moving to North Carolina next year from LA, and they're like, "You got to come with us, man. You got to come with us." And then my partner wants to move to Florida. So I don't know how much longer I'll be in LA, but to be determined. It could be North Carolina, it could be Florida, or you'll have to let me know how Montana is.
Yeah. Florida's wild too.
The
I go down every so often. My first documentary attempt was to try to film pythons back in the early like 2006 when that became the like in the news for the first time. People were sending me newspaper clippings when I was deployed, and it was that iconic photo of like the alligator bursting out of the python. I started researching, and at the time, I read there's a book called Strangers in Paradise, and it was like outlining all of the invasive wildlife in Florida. And in the back of the book, there was a list of all the scientists and their address that contributed to the book. So I was, you know, still in Iraq, between Kuwait and Iraq, and I wrote probably 20 of them and just said, "Hey, like I want to film a documentary." They don't know that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, but several of them wrote me back. So we went there and I filmed with Florida Fish and Wildlife and several people down there, several scientists that were like leading edge doing that stuff. Didn't find any pythons then. I've since been back twice, 2019 and 2021, with the organization called the Swamp Apes, which is a guy, Tom Rahill, who takes veterans out into the Everglades to catch pythons as like a way to treat PTSD. And I just love his mission where it's dual serving, serving veterans and serving the environment. Um, I saw my first python in 21, jumped at it, missed it, and it just was gone. And it was like a real thick scrub, and I couldn't get it. And truthfully, like the first time in my life, I was technically like scared of a snake. Like I looked down, I saw this thing, and my body was like, "Fuck no!" Like just like could not get my brain was like telling my body no, and I'm like, I need to be jumping, and it just didn't happen. By the time everything kind of synced up, like it was gone, and I couldn't grab it. So I got to
you were
redeem
trying to
myself.
you were trying to physically catch it.
Yeah, yeah.
How big are they?
They get huge, but
Yeah.
that one was probably only 8 or 9 feet, I think. So it wasn't like it was big, like it was the biggest snake I'd ever seen, but it wasn't like as big as they get.
Yeah.
There's a guy on Instagram. I think his name's Kevin. He goes by Snakeaholic, but he's a Florida guy down there, and he's posting like he's been going viral, posting a ton of good content of him catching them down there. I mean, the problem is they've got to be euthanized by Fish and Wildlife. So I hate that part of it. But it's eerie. When I went in 21, we were going through the canals along these what they call spill islands, which is what the tailings of the canals, and you don't hear anything. No birds, no mammals in the undergrowth, lizards. I mean, it's dead quiet, and the reason is it's because at every life phase, the pythons are eating every bit of wildlife. So that they're born, they hatch, and they're 12 to 18 inches. So they're eating the lizards, they're eating the rodents. Within a year they can be 6 to 8 feet. And now they're eating rabbits and they're eating bigger mammals, and then by the time they're full grown, they're eating deer and
Whoa.
alligators. So it's like it's a huge catastrophic problem down there, and that's just one invasive animal that's down there.
Are they mainly like they were fancy exotic pets that got released? Is that what most people think how they became invasive down there?
There's a debate about kind of how it happened. There's a kind of twofold thing. I think part of it for sure is irresponsible pet owners just let it, like they get too big, they let them go. Part of it was Hurricane Andrew, I believe, came through and kind of destroyed a bunch of breeding facilities, research areas, and let a lot of them go. I think there was some stuff that happened at the Miami airport. So there's been a lot of kind of uh, flashpoints over the years. I mean, Florida's always been a pretty hotbed. I mean, the government let go cane toads, like going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, in the 1930s to control a beetle that was on the sugarcane fields. They, as a biological control mechanism, they let cane toads go from Central and South America because that's what they ate in their natural habitat. Problem is they outcompete every native amphibian. They can eat everything because they're 5 times larger, and they didn't eat those beetles. And
Oh,
the problem multiplied itself there, Hawaii, Australia, in multiple other places, and it's just you know, like they meant good, but didn't work out.
so speaking of, you mentioned you were going to jump at the snake and try to catch it. Just about a week ago, I was in Joshua Tree,
Oh yeah,
which is a desert, and I was walking, and looking out because the sunset was so beautiful. It was like red orange and just like filling the sky. And I was like, wow, it's really beautiful. And I looked down and there was a rattlesnake snake like 1 foot away from me. I'm not gonna lie, I ran about 10 feet the other direction as soon as I
Yeah,
saw it. But what
yeah. It
was
seems.
crazy is I think it was playing dead. I think it saw me coming and maybe got scared because it didn't move at all. And then I ran like 10 feet away and then I went like wide berth, like around it, like where I was going. And then when I came back, it was gone. So at first I thought, oh, maybe that was a fake snake because it really wasn't moving. And then when I came back, it was gone. So I thought, oh shit, that was real. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
their first
ran
line. That's their
as
first
it,
line of defense. They'll the first line of defense for pretty much any snake is they're going to rely on their camouflage and just sit still. So a lot of times rattlesnakes won't rattle unless you're like right there at them.
yeah, yeah. I was like less than a foot away from this thing. I'm like, man, that's a beautiful sunset. And then I looked down, I'm like, oh shit. And I ran the other way, man. I ran like instantaneously. I was like 10 feet the other way.
I don't know what that mechanism is, but it's like we all have it. It's like that the monkey part of our brain where you're like you don't know it, but you know there's danger right there somehow instinctively, and you don't step on it. In most cases, because I've found rattlesnakes that way more often than not when I'm hiking. I'm looking for them in good habitat, so I'm in there where they're supposed to be. And 9 times out of 10, it's like I almost step on them before I find them, which is crazy because like I have a pretty tuned eye for these things, and still, it's like they're just so perfectly camouflaged. Um, it's terrifying, but I love them.
What does it mean if you see two rattlesnakes that are kind of upright vertically and they're kind of dancing at each other? You ever
It's
seen that?
yeah, it's typically it's males, male combat. So they're trying. It's the dominant display. They're trying to probably win a female. I think it's usually just males doing that, like for
Yeah.
territory or whatever.
They're going, you get out of here. This is my lady. And the other
Yeah,
one's going, no, you go. I'm gonna have her. That's what that is.
yeah.
So
I'd like to
right,
get out the Joshua Tree at some point. I know Keith and Jessica of Dead Reckoning. They have a writers retreat there now. Uh,
yeah, I saw that
um,
online.
yeah, I wasn't sure if you're aware of that, but that's from what I've seen. They were clued me into even that place existing, and it just looks awesome.
It's really cool. And actually, the prior to me running from the snake about a week before, because my girlfriend's out there. So I was going to visit her because she's working out there, and she had sent me the video of the two males kind of dancing at each other. And then a week later, when I was visiting, I almost stepped on one of them.
This is that time of year. Like I assume it's the same out there. Like right now, here the copperheads and the rattlesnakes are all. I think they've already bred. Now they're about to give birth, and they have live birth. So like the ones that I've almost stepped on, the timber rattlesnakes here were at spots where what we call a rookery, where they lay the eggs, or no, where they give birth, and then they'll hibernate not far from there,
Mhm.
which that's unnerving. Like I've been to rattlesnake dens. I've written about that on the Substack. Like it was like the game you play when you're a kid where the floor is lava, except instead of lava, it's vipers.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Sounds like a nightmare.
I love snakes and wildlife. I those experiences, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah, yeah. I think snakes are cool too, but I keep my distance, you know?
I've gotten a lot less cavalier as I've gotten older. Like a lot of my early videos, I would not free handle, but I would grab their tail and like hold them with a stick or something with the venomous stuff. Now I've gotten to a place where it's twofold. Like I don't want to send the message to kids or whoever's watching the video that it's okay to do that.
Hmm.
Um, just as a liability. Like I don't want anybody to get hurt or hurt the animal. And the other thing is like I don't need to prove that I can do it anymore. Like I've done it for years, but it's like there's no real need for me to be doing that. I think that was circling back to like the TV deals. A lot of the pushback from like the Animal Planets of the world were like, yeah, but why is he doing that? Like, why is this guy out here? He's not a scientist. He's just a dude that loves animals.
I'm
So
trying to remember. There was a Werner Herzog documentary from the early 2000s. What was that called? Was it Gorilla Man or
Grizzly Man.
Grizzly Man? And
Yeah.
that guy got killed by the Grizzlies. Sorry, spoiler alert for anyone
Yeah.
listening.
That is the most unintended comedy I've ever watched, but it is hilarious.
When I was watching it, I was like, this guy's crazy. Like
Mhm.
in the videos, like a week before he gets killed, you can see them stalking him in the video. I'm like, the grizzlies are stalking you, dude. You're talking like it's all chill, and the grizzly is like literally hunting you on camera, like figuring out how to cross the stream so he can come destroy you.
Well, there's a guy in the news now. It's like sometimes people like anthropomorphize too much and think these animals are not animals, or they think they're somehow above nature. But there's a guy that I'd seen his videos on Instagram where he's like free handling rattlesnakes and cobras and all these things. And free handling, if you're not aware, it's like we're literally just holding a venomous snake, which is not advisable. It's just the dumbest thing you can do. And he's talking about how he's never been bitten 30 years and blah blah blah. And he's getting all these videos, and then he posts a video of him free handling a taipan, which is one of the most venomous snakes in the world. And then like a few hours later, apparently it bit him, and he's in the hospital fighting for his life. Like a lot of places shared the article, and it's a matter of time for stuff like that. But there's no need to do that. Like people almost take the social media clout to a level that's like you're not helping the animals because now those animals will be euthanized, and you're not helping the community because you're going to get laws passed where people can't keep certain things now.
Yeah, don't fuck with nature. That's what I always say.
Yeah, it's kind of the way it works.
Don't fuck around. You got to just find where you fit in and go with that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Your IG is called Catching Creation. What does
Mhm.
Catching Creation mean to you?
So originally that was what kind of the umbrella was for everything I was doing at the time. Uh, at the time, it was just like a quirky name. Like when I was doing the church stuff, that was what the program was called, Catching Creation. That's what the DVD series was called, like the name of the show that I was doing. And it just kind of encompassed a lot of what I was doing because I'm literally catching creation, snakes, frogs, lizards, and whatever else. And um, I don't know. It could have been interpreted in a number of different ways, I suppose. And I just kind of stuck with it.
Yeah, so when I first read it before we had this conversation, I was thinking of it kind of like catching that inspiration. Like
Yeah,
you're sitting at your desk and then your writer's block passes and you caught the creative energy.
I
That's kind
love
of
it.
what I first thought of it, or like tapping into that field of possibility,
Yeah, I'm gonna steal that.
catching that. But as the conversation went on, I started to get, oh, it's actually like catching critters, like
Yeah,
your old nickname. I think it's a great name. I think it's very catchy. And in the spiritual world, I've heard them say that we're all creators or we're all co-creators in this experience together.
yeah, and that was kind of where a lot of it came from too. And then I didn't want it to be equated to like the creationism movement or whatever else, but there was a time where I wanted to believe that stuff so bad, like I really did, because I wanted to find a camp that I fit in, and it just couldn't do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as we get close to wrapping up, what do you want people to know? When's your book coming out? Where can they find you? And what do you want to leave people with?
I want to know when my book is coming out. My book was technically supposed to come out this month, but they've gotten kind of behind on edits. So tentatively this fall. I think contractually it's supposed to be out before December, but I'm not going to hold anybody to any of that. Like I'm just stoked that it's coming out. So
Yeah.
it'll be one of the next things that comes out from Dead Reckoning. Hopefully, I know they've got an anthology that they're working on. Um, their third poetry anthology with a bunch of different veterans. So if I've got to take a backseat to that, I'm completely cool with it. But yeah, it'll be coming out sooner than later. And then all of my stuff, you could find that at stanlakecreates.com. It's kind of a hub for, it's a link tree, reroute, but it'll show you all my social media and, um, catching creation on Instagram. Uh, was it, what am I on Substack? I think it's just stanlake.substack.com for the weekly post there. But again, it's all at, you could find all of it from my Instagram too.
Cool. Catching creation.
Yep.
Appreciate you coming on and sharing. And I look forward to keeping in touch. Enjoy your retreat, and maybe we'll have you on after you complete that.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot.
All right.
And bye.